How have I gone so many episodes in this goddamn podcast? I haven't once talked about Azumi, my original character, who's the basis of basically all the art that I'm making now and hopefully for the rest of time, because it's a well of ideas that just never seems to dry up. She's my favorite. I love her. She's great. Everyone should play the Azumi game and watch the Azumi animations on Twitter. Shill, shill, shill. That's what we do on this podcast. This is the opposite of whining. This is celebrating. The Hyperbolic Celebration Chamber, where we're talking about how great Azumi is. But we're going to whine because I can't stay too far off brand. Today I wanted to talk about Azumi and her design, and how her design has changed over time. I've had Azumi hanging around for about 2 years now. Can't believe it's been that long. Definitely not enough content relative to her age. Sad, shame on me. But one of the major changes to her design that has happened slowly over time is that her head has continued to shrink. It's gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, and her proportions otherwise have gotten larger and larger and larger. If you've been following Azumi content for a long time, you may have noticed this. I think on her 1 year anniversary last year, I pointed out even a year ago that her head had shrank significantly in proportion to the rest of her body, and I've made subtle adjustments since then. I think it shrank at least another 20%. Now, you might be wondering, why are you talking about a head shrinking 20%? Because Azumi is a 3D model, and so most of the Azumi content I make is based on the same singular base asset, and so that kind of represents all the derivative media is based on that asset. And so when that asset changes, everything that kind of is derived from it also changes. So her head has shrunk another 20% since last year. And I have some sketches for a new design for Azumi I might be working on. That's a secret. Maybe I should edit that out. Don't hold me to it. It's still very much a conceptual design. Not sold on it yet, but even that new design, her head has shrunk a little bit more. And why? Why is that? Why is her head continually shrinking? Why am I changing the proportions so much? And it's because I'm dumb. When I initially designed Azumi, the kind of concept was like an edgy Hello Kitty kind of character. Like a Hot Topic kind of character you would find. Like the idea was to make a character that could fit in all sorts of media and could be easily merchandised. I have failed on the merchandising part because I am not good at selling anything, hence why I am poor and neat. But as the media started to be created, as I started working on the game, as I started working on the animations, I quickly realized that her proportions were not very well attuned for animating action. Because creating dynamic action poses and doing action animation, they're based on human proportions, right? Because all the moves that Azumi is doing are based on human martial arts, human swordplay, human gunplay, even though she hasn't used guns and probably never will, but just for the sake of like completeness. Action is based on a human thing because fighting is something humans tend to do. And because of her very exaggerated proportions, and particularly her ginormous fucking head, because I wanted her to kind of be like a Hello Kitty kind of character initially, made posing for action and animating actions incredibly difficult because her limbs were just so stubby and tiny compared to the rest of her body that you couldn't really get really strong silhouettes in action poses. You would have to really kind of fudge things, and it led to animation that was not great. Like Azumi in the vertical slice, when I animated her combat animations, the after image of the sword is like 3 times longer than the actual sword itself is, because that was done so early on into the character's life that her head was still very large, and I actually made it larger so it would read better at low resolutions when I converted everything to sprites, that her arms were so stubby that just swinging the sword around as normal looked ridiculous. Like the sword barely went past her head, and so trying to design hitboxes around that was basically impossible. So what I had to do is make this really large kind of after image blur effect, that kind of like trails the sword, that extended far beyond the actual sword blade itself to actually give the hitboxes and the attacks themselves some reach. And this is a problem that has persisted pretty much throughout all of the animations I've done with her. And so as this problem continues to perpetuate, I've just made slowly more and more subtle changes. I've made the legs a little bit longer, made the arms a little bit longer, made the head ever smaller, and she's kind of morphed over the years from a Hello Kitty inspired Sanrio looking character to basically a furry, much to my everlasting chagrin, because everyone dunks on me for being a furry. It's not true. It really isn't, I swear, but I'm not doing myself any favors by basically continuing to slowly change my main character from a cute little animal character into very furry-esque proportions. And it's really not because I'm a furry. It's because it just, the animation and the work that she's involved in and the projects I want to do kind of almost mandate more realistic proportions, or at least more reeled in stylization in order to better facilitate the kind of action that I want her to be doing in these projects. And yeah, it's very strange. It's been a very interesting learning experience for me as someone who really hasn't done much of animations, has never done anything with animal characters. And yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is that when you do like 2D, which I've done before, because I've done stylized action in 2D in comics and stuff, like before I was on the internet and things like that, you could fudge this because you weren't working with a singular asset. It was always being redrawn panel to panel. And so when you needed a really hyperextended arm, you just drew a hyperextended arm. Now, of course, you can do that in 3D just by like stretching bones out and stuff, but it just looked weird. It looked very strange. And it just seemed like if I'm going to constantly be having to continually distort and twist and contort her body in ways that better facilitate these animations and poses I want to do, why not just change the actual base proportions so the distortion is less prevalent and the actual character design better suits the intended purpose, rather than trying to fudge the purpose into the initial design that was kind of developed in a bubble. So there you go. That's the first Azumi podcast, why her head continues to get smaller and why she's becoming more furry adjacent, but never a furry. Never. I promise. Fuck. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of the Hyperbolic Whine Chamber. In addition to doing podcasts, I also make a bunch of 3D models and animations, which you can check out at twitter.com/TommyOliverSays. I'm also making a video game called Azumi and the Vertical Slice, and I have a simple game out right now called Ninja Suffering. You can check those out linked on said Twitter profile. If you want to help support the show and keep me making it and keeping it ad-free, you can check out patreon.com/polystation2 or subscribestar.com/TomOliver. Patrons have access to over 70 bonus podcasts, so if you like this podcast and want more right now, that's the place to do it. Thanks again for listening. This podcast updates 3 days a week, ideally, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so feel free to subscribe on your preferred platform so you can catch new episodes as they come out. And patrons get episodes a week early. That's all I got for now. Have a good one.